And I think it was crucial, just going back to Haley, because her campaign is at a really critical time. She is probably one of the candidates that has been to the early states the most, yet at the same time is not making any traction in polls when people like her compatriot from South Carolina, Tim Scott, is. And so I think that this is a really good moment for her to make inroads not only with voters, people sort of seeing her in a different space for the first time, but as well as trying to get money, because I think she's going to start struggling if she can't get donors.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by White House reporter Naomi Lim. Naomi, we've had a Republican debate, the first such debate. Some candidates who maybe people didn't think would be the biggest names are the people we're talking about the most. And one person who got some rave reviews was former South Carolina Governor and United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, she came out of sort of nowhere. I wasn't expecting her to be one of the names that I would drop the following day, but I think she really made her mark on the stage. Well, not only was she like the only woman, so she made reference to that in a very sort of nuanced way, given that identity politics is something that doesn't particularly play well in a Republican primary, but also sort of leveraging her foreign policy credentials against someone like Vivek Ramaswamy, who was another name that we sort of didn't expect to talk about a lot, and did. And I think it was crucial, just going back to Haley, because her campaign is at a really critical time. She is probably one of the candidates that has been to the early states the most, yet at the same time is not making any traction in polls when people like her compatriot from South Carolina, Tim Scott, is. And so I think that this is a really good moment for her to make inroads not only with voters, people sort of seeing her in a different space for the first time, but as well as trying to get money, because I think she's going to start struggling if she can't get donors.
Right. I mean, so in a way, some of these debates, the early ones, are sort of like auditions to fundraisers, and you're kind of trying to establish that if you're not polling very well yet, there's still a lane maybe open for you. But then there are some others who are polling maybe a little bit better, who maybe didn't make as big of a splash. What do people think about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' first debate performance?
Well, it depends on who you talk to and what expectations that you were going in with. For example, the governor's campaign was sort of saying, if we survive this debate, it'll be a good thing.
Right.
That's because
managing expectations.
Exactly, and so like they lowered their expectations because he was the second place getter for so long, and so I think that there's this idea that he is also stagnant in the polls, and so he needs to sort of be able to move forward, or let somebody else, if they want to coalesce support around an anti-Trump candidate, they have to find someone else. So if you were to go by the campaign's expectations, he did really well, where that they sort of keep saying is that he looked presidential. But then talking to other people who watched it, who might not know the dynamics of the race, they sort of said that he was invisible, which is kind of good in case he wants to make a mistake, but not good if he's trying to humanize himself to a public that is still sort of trying to figure out how they feel about him. They might agree with his policies because they are particularly sort of Trump-like, but they're not quite sure about the man that's espousing them.
So, I mean, there was that memo that got leaked before the debate. Didn't seem like he hewed to that too carefully. We didn't have any moment where he says, I feel and have feelings like
emotions,
a person. I have emotions.
I mean, he did reference his wife and his children, so that was something, that we thought was going to happen. I think that was the problem with this memo, and why, reporting that, his campaign was, and he himself, the principal, was like very enraged with how it actually came out, because it kind of sort of stuck him in a corner. I mean, it wasn't particularly bad advice, advice like criticizing President Biden, sort of defending Trump if someone like former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie were to attack him, and then also to go after Ramaswamy. But by sort of putting it out there, if he were to heed that advice, it might make him look more sort of this robotic Ron that has a sort of a description of him that's gaining traction. So I think that he kind of did well. I think the other thing is that something that maybe he needs to work on next time is that, his sort of non-verbal communication, smiling at the camera in a way that looks a little bit more, less rehearsed, or less sort of, you've written this down to remind yourself to smile. So I think like going into the second debate, it'll be interesting to see what notes that these candidates take and how they'll apply them.
Look at the camera, Simon.
Exactly.
Thank you, Naomi. You can read Naomi and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.